Ladies and gentlemen, last year we did a video where we questioned what was actually really going on with the ship that docked in Cape Town. This video that we did last year actually got us the ear of the DA in the Western Cape, who actually came onto our video to debunk what we had claimed. Now, you may recall that at the time we speculated that the Russian ship had docked here, had either docked here and dropped off gold to pay the ANC staffers, or possibly had been there to pick up weaponry. And it turns out we were right on both fronts. From what it seems, according to the latest article, is that the Russian ship did dock in Simonstown, and they docked there for the purposes, according to the US ambassador, for the purpose of picking up weapons and ammunition to arm the Russians in their war against Ukraine. What is it that the ANC got in return? Well, for those of you who don't recall, the ANC had a staff bill that remained unpaid. They were 3 months behind on staff members' wages. And lo and behold, we have no idea how they got the money, but what we do know is that the staff have all been paid suddenly. Hey, who knew? Coincidence, eh? Joining me to talk about this is Ramon. Hello, Ramon.
Yes, hello, Byron. And here's the sort of dirty little secret here, right? So we have AGOA. AGOA is the trade agreement between African countries and America. It is in our favor. It's more of a charity for Africa than it is a benefit to America. And AGOA is under threat at the moment in the House of Representatives in the USA. They're thinking of canceling AGOA, particularly in South Africa, based on the South African stance towards Russia. South Africa's stance is very official. We are neutral in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but in reality, we are not. But if the US ambassador is correct and we are actually supplying weapons and ammunition to Russia, that doesn't seem extremely neutral to me. Combine that with the naval exercises that South Africa has performed with China and Russia after the start of the Ukraine conflict, well, the neutrality sort of falls on its head once again. So, Byron, it does appear that if the ANC is enriching itself through Russia, and we have very good evidence to suggest that it has done so, and it is continuing to do so, they're quite willing to put the entire South African economy at risk based on this nonsense, this bullshit idea of neutrality while performing and providing a lot of military support to the Russians and the Russian army.
Yeah, so here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that the Russians don't actually contribute anything of meaningfulness to the South African economy. The Americans, however, do. There's a large number of American companies that are based in South Africa, and they account for a far greater economic benefit to the country than the Russians or even the Chinese do. And if you look at what the US does, the US actually sends us a far greater amount of stuff in terms of trade than it actually extracts from us in terms of exports. So that would tell you that from an economic perspective, the Americans are better trade partners than, say, the Russians or the BRICS nations. So you may ask yourself, well, why would they do this? And the answer is the ANC doesn't really care about South Africa's economic policy. They like to claim that they do, and they like to go to the Americans and say, look, can you send us stuff? Like, we want stuff. We want the money for the just energy transition, and we want all of the bribes and the international kudos that you can give us. But when it really comes down to it, the only thing that the ANC are really giving a damn about is themselves. And we know that the ANC is in financial trouble. We know that the Russians do generally tend to give the ANC a lot more cash than anyone else does. And that allows the ANC obviously to carry on and milk the lucre, right? But I think for me, what really kind of shines, especially in the international order, is how little the international world understands South Africa. And so what we are now seeing is we're actually seeing the tail end of ANC ideology meeting, let's call it the uneducated from the West.
Now, before you people think we are like American shills, we're not at all. It's just a question of basic international politics. You have this AGOA stuff, you have the US, you have the EU, big trading partners, they're important trading partners. If you're going to screw around with those trade agreements, it's good to have a backup, or it's good to have something that can replace them in time to come, a sort of South African first policy to ensure that the country doesn't suffer unnecessarily. But the ANC doesn't have that. Like, it is really mind-blowing to me that the ANC is overtly selfish, like to a degree where they really don't care whatsoever for any sort of rules-based order, any sort of nationalism, any sort of respect for human life in South Africa whatsoever. If America cancels AGOA, a large portion of our exports and imports are no longer there because the EU is going to follow suit. And those are our main trading partners. If you have a backup, cool, do whatever you want, but you have no backup whatsoever. What's that going to do to South Africa? What's that going to do to unemployment rates? What's that going to do to poverty levels? They're all going to go up. There's really no upside for the country itself. And I think at the end of the day, even the ANC itself is going to find itself to be like a pariah of the world and be treated like some minnow dictator in Equatorial Guinea when no one really cares about them. Like, this is the end goal. And I just don't think the ANC are thinking through. They're thinking very short-term, selfishly for themselves, but to the detriment of everything else. And I know that they are that selfish, but sometimes even I'm shocked at how overt they are about it.
So what I can really say to you, Ramon, is at the end of the day, the ANC are not going to change its ways. Now, the Western forces, if we want to call it that, does actually say to South Africa, we don't actually mind your non-aligned policy, right? That's fine. But you're not acting in a non-aligned way. The ANC were the only party in the UN that actually voted to abstain on a Russian vote on who actually caused the war. Even our BRICS partners voted to say it was Russia. So we were the only abstaining one. We're the only one that actually are truly 100,000% siding with the Russians. And I still come back to the same question of, do these Americans not know who they're talking to? They still think that they're dealing with the ANC of Nelson Mandela, mate. Like, that's long gone, man. This is the ANC of Zuma and Ramaphosa. This is supposed to be the great reformer, the redeemer and the corruptor. Like, there's no reform here, mate. This is Africa. Like, these guys need to understand who they're dealing with.
Yeah, and we really thought that sort of Zuma was like the short-term thinker, you know, shuffling the cabinet at a moment's notice and all that sort of stuff. Ramaphosa is sort of not that, but he is that in more fundamental ways, as in changing our international policy on a dime, just like that. And I think the repercussions of that are far greater than the changing of a finance minister over the course of the weekend.
Yeah. I think this is where you and I would disagree, though, because I don't actually think that Ramaphosa is that guy. I don't think he's sitting here changing anything. I don't actually think he's doing anything,
right.
Which means that like a lot of these policies are occurring by his ministers without him really giving a damn. Does he actually care whether they go off and like do something against the Americans or the Russians? I don't think he cares, man. Like, he just don't care. Whereas one thing you can't say for Zuma, you may say he was quick and he was decisive and he was a little bit irrash, but the guy was in charge, mate. Like, nobody could sit back and say like the guy didn't take responsibility for what he did. He knew there were things he wanted to do, and mate, he did them quickly. Like, you may not have agreed with what he did, but I'm telling you, he did them. I don't think actually Ramaphosa is steering the ship, man. Like, we're a rudderless ship, and it's like every cadre and commie in charge is just like looking out for their own interests. And I think this is another example where we can actually see the legacy components, the SACP components of the ANC kind of come into the forte and just kind of like trying to push their agenda. Doesn't make sense in the overall picture of the South African economy, and is it for the benefit of the Republic? No. But these guys are all looking out for self-interest. They're not looking out for the interests of anyone else.
Well, you let us know down in the comments down below. Who is more correct? Is it me, where I'm saying that Ramaphosa is very decisive in fucking up South Africa? Or do you agree with Byron, who says that, well, actually it's everyone else and Ramaphosa has quietly quit? Let us know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, everyone. See you next week. Have a good weekend. Cheers.